The galaxy's most powerful empire was led by an alien queen, a ruler of unmatched strength and intellect. Her empire stretched across countless star systems, and she was proud of her achievements. She looked down on Earth, a small, insignificant planet in the vastness of space. To her, humans were primitive creatures, emotional, unrefined, and barely worth considering. They were just another species struggling to survive, too focused on their petty conflicts to achieve anything of real importance. From her throne, the queen watched as her advisors spoke of Earth's technological advances. Humans had developed weapons, space exploration, and even advanced communication networks. But to the queen, it all seemed laughable. They are still nothing more than children playing with toys, she thought. Her empire, built on ancient wisdom and conquest, had brought countless species to their knees. The thought that humanity could one day challenge her seemed absurd. To her, humans were no different from the countless other species that had come and gone, their histories written in the dust of forgotten planets. Despite the humans' advancements, the queen believed their society was still bound by their emotions, their insecurities. They fought over resources, land, and power, unable to unite for any meaningful purpose. Such behavior, to the queen, was a sign of weakness, not strength. Yet, a curiosity stirred within her. One day, a human ambassador would be sent to her palace. The queen's advisors had prepared her for this. They spoke of the human's bravery in approaching her, of his intelligence, and of his potential as a diplomat. But the queen only scoffed. What could a human possibly offer her? When the human arrived at the gates of her palace, he was escorted through vast halls of marble and gold, a stark contrast to the primitive world he came from. The queen sat on her throne, watching him as he entered. His eyes were steady, and his posture was straight. There was no hint of fear in him. The queen noted this, but her thoughts remained unchanged. She was convinced that this human would kneel before her, as all others had. But instead of bowing in submission, the human met her gaze with calm confidence. His eyes were full of something the queen hadn't expected. Strength, not physical, but something deeper, something human. "You are the queen of the galactic empire," the human said, his voice steady and clear. "I've come to speak with you." The queen raised an eyebrow. "Speak then, but know that your words will mean little to me." The human did not flinch. He simply nodded and began to speak of humanity's struggle for survival. He spoke of their resilience, their ingenuity, and their unyielding spirit to overcome impossible odds. He spoke of Earth's history, of their wars, their losses, and their triumphs. The queen listened, her interest piqued despite herself. The conversation went on, but it wasn't what the human said that began to stir something in the queen. It was the way he spoke, with certainty and without fear. For the first time, the queen found herself questioning her assumptions about humans. The queen had seen many species over the course of her reign, but there was something about this human that intrigued her. Could it be that she had been wrong? Could humanity, with all its flaws, truly have something more to offer than she had thought? As the conversation continued, a doubt began to grow in the queen's mind. A doubt that perhaps humans were not as primitive as she had believed. She dismissed it quickly, but the seed of curiosity had been planted. She would have to learn more about this species, this human. And so, the queen's perception of Earth began to shift, though she didn't yet realize how deeply it would change the future of her empire. The queen watched closely as the human ambassador stood before her, unbowed and confident. He was dressed simply, his clothes unadorned compared to the grandiosity of her palace. Yet there was something about him, something that made her pause. Most visitors to her court would have been awestruck by the beauty and power of her empire, but not this human. His eyes met hers directly, and there was no trace of fear or hesitation. "Do you understand who I am?" the queen asked, her voice cold and commanding. She was curious to see if this human would show respect, as all others did when meeting her. The human didn't flinch. "I know exactly who you are," He replied with a calmness that only made the queen more intrigued. "And I've come to talk, not to bow." The queen's eyes narrowed. This was not how she expected the conversation to go. She had expected a humble, subservient being, someone who would grovel at her feet and beg for mercy or alliance. But this human, he was different. He wasn't scared. Instead, he seemed resolute. "What is it that you want, human?" she asked, though her tone betrayed a hint of uncertainty. She had seen many species come and go, but never had one stood before her so boldly. The human took a deep breath and spoke in a voice that carried through the grand hall. "I come to represent humanity, not as a servant, but as a partner. We are a young species, yes, but we have something powerful, something you may not understand." He paused, looking the queen straight in the eye. "We have the ability to adapt. We learn, we grow, and we survive." The queen raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite herself. Adaptation. Learn and grow. She had seen countless species, each one struggling to survive in their own way. Some had succeeded, but most had failed. She doubted humanity was any different. "I see," she replied coolly, her interest now piqued. "But what makes you believe that your species, so young and primitive, can be anything more than a footnote in the history of the galaxy?" The human didn't back down. "Because we're not afraid to fail. And when we do, we try again. We don't stop." His words hung in the air, and for the first time, the queen felt a flicker of doubt. "Your people are driven by emotions," she said, trying to dismiss his point. "Anger, fear, greed. These weaknesses will destroy you in the end." The human smiled slightly, almost as if he knew something the queen didn't. "You're wrong," he said softly. "It's not our emotions that destroy us. It's our refusal to give up. That's what makes us strong." The queen couldn't help but feel a small sense of admiration for this human. Despite her convictions, there was something in his words that resonated with her, something she hadn't expected. Was it possible that humanity's strength didn't come from their technology or their power, but from their persistence? She studied him in silence, trying to understand what made him tick. He wasn't like the others. She could see it in his eyes. The quiet confidence, the unspoken belief that humanity had a future in the galaxy, despite its flaws. For the first time, the queen found herself questioning her own beliefs. Could it be true? Could this human represent a species that wasn't as weak as she had always thought? The queen was no stranger to power, but this human's words had made her realize something. Perhaps true strength wasn't about control and dominance. Maybe, just maybe, it was about resilience. The queen's thoughts swirled, but she said nothing. She simply nodded, as though the conversation had ended. But in her mind, the seed of doubt had been planted, and she wasn't sure it could be easily uprooted. The queen sat in her grand hall, deep in thought, her eyes staring out into the vast stars beyond. She had always prided herself on her knowledge and her ability to see the true nature of things. She had studied countless species, each one different, each one unique, but none had ever made her question herself the way this human had. He had said things that lingered in her mind, and now, no matter how hard she tried to push the thoughts away, they kept returning. "Your species is driven by emotions," she had said, trying to dismiss him. "Anger, fear, greed, weaknesses that will be your downfall." But his response had haunted her. He had told her that it wasn't their emotions that destroyed them, but their refusal to give up. The more the queen thought about it, the more she realized there might be truth in his words. She had seen civilizations crumble before her eyes, great empires that had fallen because they were built on fear, control, and conquest. Yet the human species seemed to thrive despite their emotions, despite the chaos they often caused among themselves. She couldn't help but wonder, could it be that they had something she had overlooked all along? The human ambassador had spoken of their ability to adapt, and the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. She had dismissed humanity as primitive, but maybe their strength wasn't in their technology or their ability to conquer, but in their sheer will to survive. Perhaps, unlike the other species she had encountered, they didn't simply survive. They thrived, no matter the odds. The Queen's mind raced as she pondered the implications. Could this human be telling the truth? Could there be something more to humanity than just their violent history and their petty conflicts? She had assumed that true strength lay in power, in domination, in control. But now she wasn't so sure. The human's words echoed in her mind. We don't stop. We try again. She stood up and paced the room, her thoughts clouded by doubt. She had never known this kind of uncertainty before. Her empire had been built on order, on the belief that the strongest must rule, that the weak should be controlled or eliminated. But if this human was right, if humanity's strength lay in their ability to adapt and persevere, then maybe her empire wasn't as unshakable as she had always believed. The Queen turned to her closest advisor, a stoic alien who had served her for years. "What do you think of the human ambassador?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with curiosity. Her advisor, an experienced strategist, did not hesitate. "He is clever, my queen, but his species is still too young, too raw. They lack the discipline we have. They lack the power of our empire." The Queen looked at him, but for once, she wasn't convinced by his words. She thought back to the human's gaze, steady and unwavering, even when faced with her power. There was something different about him, a strength, not in his body, but in his mind, in his spirit, something that made him stand tall, despite the overwhelming odds against him. She took a deep breath and made a decision. "Prepare the trials," she said, her voice firm. "We will test this human. If he can survive them, then perhaps I have been wrong about humanity." The advisor nodded, sensing the shift in her thoughts. For the first time, the Queen was willing to acknowledge that her empire might not hold all the answers, and that perhaps, just perhaps, there was more to the human species than she had ever imagined. The Queen stood before the towering windows of her palace, gazing out into the stars. Her thoughts were clouded, caught in a storm of uncertainty. The vastness of space stretched before her, as it always had, but now it seemed different. The stars no longer felt as constant and unchanging as they once did. Humanity, that small and primitive species, had somehow begun to chip away at her certainty. For the first time in her reign, the Queen doubted her own judgment. Her empire was built on strength, dominance, and order. Every species she had encountered had fallen in line, either by force or by alliance, bending to the power of her rule. She had always believed that the strongest, the most controlled, were the ones who deserved to lead. And yet, as she reflected on the human ambassador's words, a seed of doubt began to sprout. "We don't stop. We try again." The human's words echoed in her mind like a constant refrain. At first, she had dismissed them as naive, the simple boasting of a species that had barely begun to understand the realities of galactic power. But now, those words felt like a challenge, not just to her empire, but to the very way she viewed strength. For the first time in years, the Queen found herself asking questions she had never thought to ask. What made her empire so powerful? Was it really her might, her ability to control, to conquer? Or was it something else? Something deeper? She had always assumed that strength was defined by domination and fear, but now she wondered if there might be another kind of strength, the kind that came from persistence, from the ability to adapt to any challenge. The human ambassador had told her about his species' ability to adapt, to learn, and to survive against impossible odds. Could it be true? Could humans really be more than the primitive creatures she had always seen them as? Could their resilience be a force powerful enough to shake the foundations of her empire? The more the Queen thought about it, the more she realized she had underestimated them. She had dismissed humanity's ability to thrive in the face of adversity, assuming that their emotions and flaws would be their downfall. But perhaps she was wrong. Perhaps humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their technology or their power, but in their refusal to give up, in their ability to rise after every fall, to adapt, to keep going when everything else told them to quit. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was her chief advisor, a tall, imposing figure who had been with her for many years. He entered the room, his expression serious. "My queen," he began, bowing his head slightly. "The human ambassador has requested another meeting. He wishes to discuss an alliance, a partnership between our species." The queen turned slowly to face him, her expression unreadable. She had expected this. The human had hinted at it during their previous conversation. But what surprised her now was the sense of curiosity, not annoyance, that stirred within her. The idea of an alliance with Earth no longer seemed so foolish. In fact, it almost felt possible. "Prepare the trial," the queen said, her voice steady, but carrying a new resolve. "We will see if the human's words are more than just empty promises." As her advisor left to make preparations, the queen stood silently for a moment, lost in thought. She had always believed in the power of her empire. But now she wasn't so sure. Could humanity truly be the partner she had been searching for? Or would they fail like the others? Only time would tell. But for the first time in her life, the queen was willing to find out. The queen stood at the heart of her grand arena, watching as the human ambassador stepped onto the field. The arena was a vast, open space surrounded by towering walls of crystal, designed for the most challenging tests. Today, it would be no different. The queen had made up her mind. If this human wished to prove his worth, he would face a series of trials that even the strongest of her empire would struggle to survive. She watched intently from her high platform, surrounded by her generals and advisors. They all believed the human would fail. The trials were set up for a reason: to weed out the weak, to show who was truly strong. And she had no doubt that this human would be defeated by the first test. The human ambassador stood at the edge of the arena, his face calm and determined. His eyes scanned the various obstacles that had been carefully placed in the field. There were traps, mazes, and challenges designed to test both mind and body. The queen had prepared a test of endurance, intelligence, and courage. "Are you ready, human?" the queen called out from above. Her voice echoed through the arena, sharp and cold. The human ambassador nodded, never breaking his calm gaze. "I am ready," he replied, his voice steady. A deep horn sounded, signaling the start of the first trial. Immediately, the ground before the human cracked open, revealing a series of sharp, spiked pits. The human stepped back, but instead of panicking, he quickly assessed the situation. The queen watched with a sharp eye as the human moved with purpose, using his surroundings to his advantage. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look for a way to escape. Instead, he used his intelligence, carefully stepping over the traps, finding the safest path through the deadly obstacles. The queen felt a flicker of surprise. Most would have panicked at the first sign of danger. But not this human. He moved with a quiet confidence, as if he had faced challenges like this before. The first trial was completed. The human had made it through the traps, unharmed. The queen could hear murmurs among her advisors. They were not as confident now, but the queen remained focused, unwilling to show any sign of doubt. The second trial was ready. A series of giant, moving stone pillars were set to crush anything in their path. The human was to navigate through them without being caught. The pillars shifted and moved with incredible speed, making it nearly impossible to avoid them. The queen knew this would be the true test. No one could pass this trial without being caught at least once. The human ambassador took a deep breath and began his movements. He darted between the columns with incredible agility, his body flowing like water, moving just out of reach of the heavy stones. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the human proved he could predict the motion of the pillars. With each passing moment, he grew closer to the exit, weaving through the maze of stone. When he finally reached the end, untouched, the queen could no longer ignore the fact that this human was something special. His body wasn't stronger than any of her warriors. He didn't have the same advanced technology as her empire. But he had something else. Something that was becoming impossible to overlook, a relentless will to survive. The queen stood silent, her gaze fixed on the human, who was now breathing heavily but still standing tall. She could see the sweat on his brow, but his determination never wavered. Her empire, with all its might, had never faced someone like this before. She had expected him to fall, to fail, but here he was, victorious. "You have passed the second trial," the queen said, her voice cold, but there was a hint of something else in her tone. Respect. Curiosity. She wasn't sure, but she knew this human had done what none of her own soldiers had ever managed. The human bowed his head slightly, acknowledging the queen's words, but his eyes, as always, remained steady. "I told you, Your Majesty," he said softly, "we don't stop." The queen didn't respond at first. She simply watched him, her mind racing. She had always believed that strength came from control and domination. But now, after witnessing this human's resilience, she began to wonder if there was another kind of strength she had yet to understand. The air in the arena was thick with tension as the queen stood above, watching the human prepare for the final trial. The previous trials had been intense, but this one would test him in ways the others had not. It was the most dangerous challenge she had ever devised, one that no being had ever passed. She had carefully crafted this trial, sure it would prove the limits of the human's strength and resolve. The final test was set in a dark labyrinth. The walls were high and jagged, filled with sharp turns and dead ends. The queen's advisors had designed it to be a place of confusion and fear, a maze where the weak would panic and the strong would falter. Hidden within the labyrinth were deadly creatures, lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. It was a test of both mind and body, a test that no one had ever escaped unscathed. The human stood at the entrance of the labyrinth, his eyes scanning the dark, twisting corridors before him. His chest rose and fell with slow, steady breaths, as though the pressure of the moment didn't faze him. His confidence had only grown with each trial, and now, in the face of the most dangerous challenge yet, he seemed ready. "Are you prepared?" The queen's voice rang out, cool and emotionless from her platform. The human didn't respond with words. Instead, he nodded, his expression unwavering. He had no fear in his eyes. The queen watched as he stepped forward, disappearing into the dark labyrinth. The moment the human entered, the trial began. The queen activated the maze's traps, sending shadows into motion. Creatures began to stir, their growls echoing in the confined space. The maze's walls shifted, creating new paths and obstacles, forcing the human to think quickly and adapt to the ever-changing environment. For hours, the queen watched, fascinated by what she saw. The human moved with calculated precision, his mind working faster than the maze could shift. He didn't panic when the walls closed in on him, nor did he hesitate when a creature lunged from the shadows. Instead, he fought back with intelligence and agility, using the environment to his advantage, trapping the creatures in corners and outsmarting them with every turn. At one point, a massive creature emerged from the shadows, its claws sharp and its eyes glowing with menace. It charged at the human, but rather than fleeing, he stood his ground. The queen's advisors gasped as they watched the human use the environment to trap the creature, knocking it unconscious with a well-placed strike. He didn't just survive. He dominated the threat with skill and speed. Time passed, but the human did not falter. The queen's gaze never left the arena as she watched him weave through the labyrinth, determined and unyielding. He had done what no one else had ever done. He had adapted. He had faced every challenge head-on, and with each victory, his confidence seemed to grow. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the human emerged from the labyrinth, bruised but unbroken. His clothes were torn, and his body was covered in sweat and dirt, but his eyes were still sharp, still full of determination. The queen stood, her expression unreadable as she gazed down at the human who had just completed the final trial. The arena fell silent. She could see the respect in his eyes, but more than that, she could see something else, something she hadn't expected to see from this species. strength. He had survived the maze not because of sheer power, but because of his resilience, his intelligence, and his refusal to give up. The queen had thought that strength meant domination, that power lay in control. But now, for the first time, she saw that there was another kind of strength, one that didn't rely on fear, but on the ability to rise again and again, no matter the odds. The human stood before her, breathing heavily but steady. He met her gaze, and for a brief moment, there was no need for words. The queen understood now. Humanity was not weak. They were not primitive. They were survivors. "You've passed," the queen said, her voice low, but there was a change in it, a hint of something she hadn't expected: respect. The human nodded, his expression still calm. "I told you, Your Majesty, we don't stop." For the first time, the queen didn't dismiss his words. She looked at him, not as a conqueror, but as an equal. The human had done what no other species had ever done before, and in that moment, she realized that the future of the galaxy might not lie in power and control, but in something else entirely. The queen stood alone in her chamber, the stars outside her window twinkling softly in the distance. Her mind was racing, filled with thoughts and questions she had never expected to consider. The human ambassador had passed every trial with a strength and resolve that had shaken her beliefs. For the first time in her reign, the queen felt unsure of herself. She had ruled the galaxy with an iron fist, believing that power came from dominance, from control. Her empire had grown through conquest, and she had always thought that the strongest, the most ruthless, were destined to rule. But now, after witnessing the human's determination and resilience, she began to question that certainty. The human had shown her something she had never expected to see, a kind of strength that didn't rely on force or fear. Instead, it was a strength born from persistence, from the ability to adapt and keep going even when all seemed lost. It was a kind of strength she had never understood before. The queen sat at her throne, her fingers gently tapping the armrest as she recalled the events of the trials. The human had faced every challenge with unwavering courage, never backing down, never losing hope. He had found a way to survive each obstacle, even when the odds seemed impossible. He had proven that his species had a strength far beyond her expectations. For a long time, the queen had believed that the galaxy's true power was in its ability to control and dominate. But now, as she reflected on the human's trials, she wondered if there was another way. Was it possible that the future of the galaxy wasn't about ruling with fear, but about learning, adapting, and evolving? Could humanity's strength, their refusal to give up, be the key to something greater than she had ever imagined? A soft knock on the door broke her thoughts. Her most trusted advisor entered, bowing respectfully. "My queen, the human ambassador awaits your decision." The queen looked up at him, her expression unreadable. She had expected this moment to be a simple one, a moment where she would declare her victory over the human, where she would remind him of his place in the galaxy. But now, after everything she had witnessed, she was unsure of what to say. "Bring him in," she said quietly, her voice betraying none of the turmoil she felt inside. The human entered the chamber, his posture still as calm and steady as ever. He had faced every trial and emerged victorious. But now, the stakes were higher than ever. The queen looked at him, no longer with disdain, but with something else, something that felt almost like respect. "You have proven your worth," she said, her voice low but firm. "You have shown me that humanity is not weak. You are not primitive, as I once thought." The human's expression didn't change, but there was a glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. "I told you, Your Majesty, we don't stop." The queen stood and walked slowly toward him, her gaze never leaving his. "You have made me reconsider my beliefs," she said quietly. "You have shown me that strength does not come from control. Perhaps it comes from something else, something I have failed to see." For the first time, the queen felt vulnerable. She had built her empire on the idea that control was everything. But now, after seeing the human's courage and determination, She realized that maybe true power came from something more. It came from the ability to adapt, to change, and to never give up, no matter the odds. She paused for a moment, then continued. Humanity has proven that it is more than I ever imagined, and I have decided that we should not be enemies. Instead, we will stand together as equals. The human's eyes widened slightly, but he said nothing. The queen could see that he was surprised, but there was no arrogance in his gaze, just quiet understanding. The queen turned away, looking out at the stars once more. I believe there is much we can learn from each other, she said softly. Perhaps the future of the galaxy does not lie in domination, but in cooperation, and humanity, with all its flaws and strengths, may be the key to that future. The human bowed his head respectfully. I look forward to working together, Your Majesty. For the first time in her life, the queen felt a sense of hope. Hope that the future could be different, that it could be better. She had always believed in the power of her empire, but now she saw that there were other ways to achieve greatness. And maybe, just maybe, humanity would help lead the way. The queen stood on the balcony of her grand palace, looking out over the vast expanse of the galaxy. The stars glittered like scattered jewels across the black sky, each one a world of possibilities. Her empire stretched across many of these stars, but in her heart, she felt the weight of something new, a sense of change. It was a feeling she had never expected, especially after all these years of rule. But the human had done something to her, something that made her question everything she thought she knew about strength and power. Behind her, the doors to her chamber opened softly. Her chief advisor entered, followed by several other high-ranking officials. They had all been waiting for her decision. The human ambassador had passed every trial, defied every expectation, and now, the moment of judgment had come. They expected the queen to declare her victory, to remind the ambassador that humanity was still a small, insignificant species compared to the might of her empire. But this time, the queen's heart was not set on such a conclusion. My queen, the advisor said, bowing slightly, the time has come to declare your decision. Will you honor the human's request for an alliance? The queen turned slowly, her face unreadable, but her eyes had changed. They were no longer filled with arrogance, but with something softer, something she hadn't felt in years. Yes, she replied, her voice calm but filled with authority. I will honor it. There was a moment of silence in the room, as the advisors exchanged confused glances. They had not expected this. The queen, the ruler of the galaxy's most powerful empire, was about to make a decision that would alter the future of her reign. An alliance with humanity, a species she had once dismissed as weak, was not only unexpected, it was revolutionary. An alliance. One of her generals finally spoke up, his voice filled with doubt. Your Majesty, are you certain? We are the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Humanity is. Humanity is not weak, the queen interrupted, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. They are strong in ways we have overlooked. They don't seek control through fear, but through resilience. They adapt, they endure, and they never stop. The room fell silent again. The queen's words hung in the air, and the officials were left to consider what she had said. They had always believed that power was about domination, about being the strongest and the most feared. But now, after witnessing humanity's determination and spirit, the queen had come to a different conclusion. We will form an alliance with humanity, the queen said, her voice resolute. Not as a sign of weakness, but as a sign of strength. The future of the galaxy does not lie in control. It lies in cooperation. Her advisors exchanged glances again, but this time there was no argument. The queen's decision was final, and they knew that challenging her now would be a mistake. They had witnessed her leadership for years, and they knew better than to question her authority. I will send word to the human ambassador, the queen continued. We will work together, share knowledge, and build a future based on mutual respect. The old ways of domination will end here. The future belongs to those who are willing to adapt and grow, and humanity has shown me that they are capable of that." The chief advisor bowed low, a sign of respect. "As you wish, my queen." The queen nodded, her gaze drifting back to the stars. She felt a sense of peace wash over her, something she had not felt in a long time. Her empire had been built on the idea of strength through control, but now she saw that true strength lay in something more. In resilience, in the willingness to change. Humanity had proven that it was not bound by the limitations of the past, and with that, the queen realized that her empire, too, had the chance to evolve. Perhaps this alliance with humanity would be the beginning of something greater, something that would change the course of history. The queen sat in the grand hall, surrounded by her closest advisors and the human ambassador. The air was thick with anticipation. Today was the day that humanity would no longer be seen as a primitive species, but as a partner. The queen had never imagined such a day would come, but here it was. The moment of change had arrived. Across the table, the human ambassador sat with a calm expression. His eyes, however, spoke volumes. There was no arrogance in his gaze, only a quiet understanding of the importance of this moment. The queen could see the pride in his eyes, but there was no triumph. He wasn't here to claim victory. He was here to begin something new, something they would build together. "My queen," the human ambassador began, his voice steady, "I thank you for giving us this opportunity. This is a new beginning for our species, and we won't take it for granted." The queen nodded, her eyes not leaving his. "You have earned this opportunity. Through your actions, you have proven that humanity is capable of more than we ever believed. Today we begin a new era, not as enemies, but as allies." The room fell silent. The queen's words hung in the air. There had been no grand speeches, no declarations of domination, only simple truth. She had seen the potential in humanity, and now she was ready to act on it. The treaty they were about to sign was unlike any other. It wasn't just an agreement between two powers. It was a declaration of unity. A pact between two species that had once been so different, yet now found common ground. The terms were simple, but the significance was profound. The queen's chief advisor stepped forward with the treaty in hand. The document was elegantly written, each word carefully chosen to symbolize the new bond between the two species. It spoke of cooperation, knowledge exchange, and mutual respect. It spoke of a future where humans and the galactic empire could thrive together, not through control, but through partnership. "The terms are agreed upon," the queen said, her voice calm but firm. "Now we seal this agreement, not just as rulers, but as equals." The human ambassador nodded. "Agreed." With that, both the queen and the human ambassador signed the treaty. The sound of the pen scratching across the paper was soft but symbolic. In that moment, a new future was born. A future where the past of conquest and domination was no longer the path forward. The queen looked at the human ambassador one last time, her expression softening. "This is only the beginning," she said. "We have much to learn from each other." The human ambassador smiled slightly. "And we're ready to learn." As the ceremony concluded, the room filled with murmurs of approval. The advisors, though unsure at first, had come to accept the queen's decision. They understood now that this wasn't a sign of weakness, but a bold step into a new era. An era where strength came not from domination, but from unity and cooperation. The queen walked to the window, gazing out at the stars. For the first time, the future didn't seem so certain, but it felt right. Humanity, with all its flaws and strengths, would walk beside her empire. Together, they would face the unknown future, not as rivals, but as partners. The queen knew that there would be challenges ahead. The galaxy was vast, and not everyone would agree with this new path. But today, she had made the first step toward a future that was built on understanding and shared purpose. A future where they would thrive together. And for the first time in a long time, the queen felt a sense of peace. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was hers to walk, alongside humanity. The grand palace was silent, save for the soft hum of distant conversations and the gentle rustling of papers. The queen stood at the balcony once more, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The stars above shimmered with the promise of something new. She had always believed that the stars were a reflection of power, that the brightest ones were the ones that ruled. But now, as she looked out, she saw them differently. They weren't just symbols of control, they were symbols of possibility. Her empire had been built on the idea that power was achieved through dominance, through fear. But now she saw the stars as reminders of what could be achieved through cooperation. The galaxy was vast, full of unknowns, but there was no longer any reason to face it alone. Behind her, the door to the chamber opened quietly. The human ambassador entered, his presence calm and steady as always. He had become a familiar figure to the queen, someone she now saw not as an outsider, but as an equal. Together, they had created something that neither of their species had ever seen before, a true partnership. "You look out at the stars often, Your Majesty," the human said, his voice gentle but filled with curiosity. "What do you see now?" The queen turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. "I see the future," she replied, her voice steady. "A future where we no longer need to fight to prove ourselves. A future where we can build together, learn from each other, and share what we have to offer." The human ambassador smiled slightly. A future built on unity. The queen nodded. "Yes, we have taken the first step. The treaty we signed is only the beginning. There will be those who challenge us, who believe that old ways are the only ways, but we will face those challenges together." She walked toward him, her eyes locking with his. "I once thought that strength meant control, but now I understand. True strength lies in our ability to adapt, to work together, to grow. We must not allow fear or pride to guide us. We must allow understanding and respect to lead the way." The human ambassador nodded. "We are ready, Your Majesty. We will stand with you, just as you have stood with us. Together, we will face whatever comes." The queen's heart stirred with something she hadn't felt in years: hope. For so long, she had ruled with the belief that power was the ultimate goal, that strength was something to be earned through dominance. But now, she saw that there was another way, one that didn't rely on conquest or control. It was a way built on respect, cooperation, and mutual growth. The room was quiet for a moment, the only sound the distant hum of the palace. Outside, the stars continued to shine brightly, as though they too were watching this new chapter unfold. The queen felt a sense of peace that she had never known before. The galaxy, once so vast and overwhelming, now seemed full of potential. She stepped away from the balcony, turning back to the human ambassador. "This is only the beginning," she said softly. "We have much to do, and many challenges ahead. But I believe that together we can shape the future of the galaxy. We will create something new, something greater than we could have ever achieved alone." The human ambassador bowed his head in respect. "We will, Your Majesty." As the queen and the ambassador stood together, the weight of their decision seemed to lift. The challenges of the past no longer defined them. They had built something new, something that could change the fate of the galaxy. And as they stood there, side by side, the queen knew that the future was not something to fear. It was something to embrace. And for the first time in her reign, the queen truly believed that the stars above weren't just symbols of power. They were symbols of hope, a hope that she and humanity would carry forward into the unknown.